remote host, though, is really useful to be able to gather those facts, because then you can tell, oh, hey, it's Ubuntu 16.04. Oh, no, wait, this one's Ubuntu 14.04. And you can treat it differently if you need to then. And then you can see here, we've said, oh, we're going to use roles, and specifically the role name that we're going to use is hello.
Now, one thing to note, in any YAML file, at the very top, you have to have these 3 dashes, and that's required as part of the file format. So even though a YAML file looks like a normal text file, and it can end as a .yml or .yaml, again, you have to have these 3 dashes on the first line.
All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the tasks main.yaml, the templates, and the vars. So here's what the task looks like. So we have 2 different tasks defined in here. The first one is we want to verify the compile directory exists. So there's a module in here called file, and then you just specify like where you want that to be. And oh, hey, we want it to be a directory. We don't actually want it to be a file in this case. So we're creating this output directory that we can put our new files into to keep things organized. The second task here is generate hello. And in this case, we're using the template module. And the source, it knows automatically to check in the templates directory in this particular role. So all we have to do to reference it is just say what the template name is, which is hello.j2. Destination, we want to make sure we put it in that output directory that we just generated up above. And then we want to name it something specific. We want to name it hello dash, and then this number, and this is a variable that we're referencing right here, .text. So this with items function here is saying, oh, hey, we want to use something called info, and we want to loop through that. And so the reason that this number variable up here says item.number is you want to loop through the items listed in info. We'll look at the vars next. So that you can iterate through that and generate a different text file with that set of variables.
So just to clarify here, the file and template, those are what's called Ansible modules, and the directives you see there have the equal sign, so the path equals, the state equals. The with items is sort of a meta function that can be applied to multiple modules. So almost any module can take a list that it can iterate through.
So we're going to look at the variables here, then a little more context. So you can see info is what we reference as the with items right there. And then in there, we have a pretty basic small dictionary in that list. So we have name world number 1, name apricot number 2. And so that's what we're going to be able to iterate over, is that number in generating those template files.
And again, because it's this variable file is called main.yaml, and it's located in this roles directory, it's going to be sourced in automatically.
Here's what the template looks like. It's very, very simple. So we just want to do hello item.name. And we're doing that item.name because we're looping through it in the template generation, and we're just going to insert the name into that file. So that's what all the files look like right there. So now what we can do is we can actually run this. So just to explain this real quick, so what we want to do is we want to execute an Ansible playbook. So you can run just one-off raw commands if you just use Ansible. There's a whole lot of commands in there, but we're specifying we're going to use a playbook. The -I signifies that we are going to use an inventory file. We happen to call our inventory directory instead of files inventory, so that's the next item there. And then we want to make sure to include the playbook that we want to run, which in this case we just call playbook.yaml.
So what you're going to see here is if you remember in the list of tasks that we're performing, there was a section called name, right? So when you see the task output here, hello is the role, and then we've got a colon and then the name of that task. So there's the verified compile directory exist. So this is a way that when you list those tasks, you can basically explain what you're attempting to do. So you could just list the actual module and the directives for it, and go ahead and run it. But this name allows you to kind of state to the operator, here's what I'm trying to do in case it doesn't work or doesn't succeed. So that's quite useful. One thing that's also interesting about Ansible is that when you run this command, as Bronwyn mentioned, it's idempotent. And so that what that means is that if a change has already occurred, it's not going to redo that change each time. And so one of the ways you'll get that is based upon color feedback. So in the color feedback here, we see there's a couple things that are kind of this dark orange color, or I guess it's almost kind of a dark brown, maybe yellow up on the screen there. And it's noted that something has changed. And we actually get a summary at the end that stated, yes, I successfully ran some things, these particular tasks that were defined, and the role, and some things have changed. Now, if we run it again, one of the things that's interesting here is everything comes back green because nothing's changed, right? So this is really the power of idempotent software. Any kind of traditional software engineer has heard of this sort of thing. But again, this is very powerful to give you some feedback each time you run it. So now let's look at some of the output of those files. And so it created the output directory. So if we run the tree command, we'll see that now there is an output directory, and it's created these two files. So let's go ahead and look at those files. Okay, so we've got the hello world and the hello apricot. So again, those were some variables that we sourced, and then we outputted these various text files.
So here's the hello world before that we saw. There's the actual run. And then there's the after with the output and the text files in there. And we wanted to make these slides so that you could reference them later, or if you send this to some colleagues or friends or something like that. It's kind of self-explanatory. Okay, so structure. We've kind of touched on this already. There's lots of different ways that you can structure your Ansible. You can use roles, you can use an inventory, there's global vars, there's group vars, there's host vars. It depends on your situation. The way that we're kind of approaching this is that these are kind of our best practice experiences through trial and error. But there's usually, 2 or 3 different ways that you can accomplish just about anything in Ansible. So it doesn't necessarily mean that this is like the one right way to do it. This is just what we found was easiest to like help other people learn. Okay, so for folks following along, what we're going to want to do is change into the workspace directory. And we've already got some reference files in there in a reference directory for you to help speed this up a little bit. So the files that we're going to use primarily are going to be config1. That's going to be our first template. If we have enough time, we'll try doing the config1 DHCP. And then otherwise we have IP address and variables. And we're actually going to switch over so I can show you what those look like. So let me get out of here. Move into the workspace. So you can see there, reference directory inside of workspace. We have all those files. So here's that config1 that we're going to copy at a later step once we start to structure everything. And here's the IP addresses. These are some special reference and documentation IP addresses that are actually reserved. And we've kind of gone ahead and already like paired up those IPv4 and IPv6 addresses for you in this variables file in the reference directory. And that's just to help simplify things. This is not going to be the variables format that we're going to use. We're going to have to edit this. We're going to have to add a couple of additional things to it as well.
So again, this is just reference data, and that you may have an Excel sheet or a CSV file or some text files. This is the data that we're using for this demonstration.
Okay, so the first thing that we're going to tackle are going to be inventory and roles, which we've already talked about a little bit. Inventory is just going to simplify our lives. Roles are also really going to simplify our lives.
And both features here are independent of each other, and they can be used separately, but we think they're pretty powerful, and this is kind of the best practice you should probably use.
Okay, so the first thing that we want to do here is go ahead and do make directory for the inventory.
Then we're going to create just an empty file, this host file, in the inventory directory.
And now you can see that our directory looks like this.
And then we're going to make a few roles examples here. So we're going to create one role, and as you remember, roles typically at a minimum will have a task subdirectory and a template subdirectory, pluralized names there. They can also have a vars a directory, files directory, and other such kind of Ansible standards, if you will. So again, just reviewing that, again, we've created this roles directory. We've got some subdirectories under it, and now we're just going to touch some files out under both the task and the vars directory. And if you remember, if it's named main.yaml, Ansible will source that automatically.
Here, I'll show you real quick what that looks like. So hopefully for those folks following along, you have a directory file structure that looks like this. Okay, so variables is the next step that we're going to tackle here. There's a lot of different ways that you can format variables. There's individual variables, there's lists, there's dictionaries. You can do dictionaries of dictionaries, lists of dictionaries. It can get really complicated. And the specific formatting can vary. One thing that's really important to know here that I have on this slide is that the formatting really impacts how you utilize variables in your tasks and in your templates. So that's one thing that I've struggled with the most is like if I go to execute some Ansible and it fails, odds are it's probably because of the way I'm trying to pull in variables. Just because you have to access it a very different way if it's a list or if it's a dictionary or if it's a list of dictionaries.
So we're going to take that reference data and put it in the file format that Ansible reads. And as you remember, those are YAML formats for these plays that we define and the source variable data.
So this is just to show what that reference variables file looks like. So then we will move it over here.
So we're just going to kind of redirect, again, that sort of source data. We're going to put it into the YAML file. And then we're going to open up our text editor to modify that YAML file. And if folks remember, again, the very first thing in any YAML file is those 3 dashes up at the top. That's, again, required to be a valid YAML file.
I'm just going to pause for a moment to okay, so now we're going to go ahead and edit this file. We want those 3 dashes at the top for the YAML format.
Yeah, so we're going to create a list here of sites and take, again, that data that we had, that was just reference data, and format it into a valid YAML file. So what we'll do here is, specify a couple different variables here. So we've got, host name that we're listing, and we'll give that some example airport codes for the host name. We've got this is a simple list values that we have here. And so as you notice, one of the things is that the addresses that we're listing here are network addresses. And this will be very important in the next few slides as we iterate through that variable data. And you saw in the first example, we had some variable data and we just echoed it back. It was very simple that we outputted to a text file. We're going to do something very similar here, but we can actually translate that data. And by having it be a network address, it's actually very powerful. So we'll do some example airports here. We'll have San Francisco, of course, Ho Chi Minh City, and we'll do Hong Kong. Now, one of the things that we're going to do here is also surround the data in quotes or double quotes. And the reason for that is in YAML data, when you have numbers that are not in quotes, it's going to assume it's an integer. And obviously, these are not kind of the standard format for an integer. We've got multiple colons, we've got slashes, that sort of thing. So by putting it with the double quotes, we're clarifying that this is just a special string and to treat it as a normal text string. Don't try to assume it's an integer string.
And this is especially important for any variable that does have a colon in it, because you can see we have like the variable like key basically, and then colon, and then what the value is. And so what Ansible will do is it will assume any colon it sees needs to go to the next thing. So with IPv6 addresses in particular, this will cause your Ansible to break. Very important that you wrap your IPv6 addresses in quotes.
And again, as we've copied this reference data into this YAML format, we're going to add another list item for each of these three as a description, just a very, again, another free-form field. Switch the slides. Save it. Okay, so again, we've taken the reference data, we've formatted it as a YAML document. So now we're talking about the IP address filter. So as Brahma mentioned, this is some code that was added in Ansible in 1.9, so about a year ago. And this provides a way to take that variable data, again, we've stored it as a network address, and to do various calculations on it. So we could say, okay, I want you to show me the first usable address in this subnet, or I want you to return this address without the CIDR notation, or I want you to do it in the wildcard subnet notation like a Cisco router might do. So it's quite powerful, and so we're going to show an example of that.
Okay, so now we're going to work on the templates here, since we have our bars formatted the way that we want. So templates are really cool because you can do a lot with them. They're very, very powerful. Basically, almost anything that you can do in Jinja 2 templating, you can do in the Jinja 2 templating in Ansible. So I just look up the Jinja 2 documentation and reference that a lot. There's some amazing things you can do. Sometimes it's pretty basic programming stuff, like, okay, I want to title case this particular word. So maybe the word's all lowercase or all uppercase, and I want to make sure it's just the first letter is uppercase. Or maybe I want to make sure it's all uppercase, or that it's all lowercase. And so you can also do a lot of stuff like if and when statements, and you can do loops. We're going to do some examples of that, hopefully, at least in the 102, but maybe even today if we have time.
So again, we've created this variable that's structured as this YAML document. And so now what we're going to do is write the template. So again, that reference config1 looked like kind of a Cisco iOS style config. So we're just going to copy that out, and then we're going to cat it so you can see what it looks like again.
And you can see here that when I'm copying over that config1, I'm adding the .j2. You don't have to do that, but we consider it best practice since you are going to be using this as a Jinja2 template. And we would rather be explicit than implicit.
So again, it's that source data. We haven't changed anything yet. And then we're going to look again to remember that the variable data that we've already structured in the YAML format. Again, we've got these sites, and we've got a list of 3 different sites. We've got a description. We've got the v4 and v6 as network addresses. So now let's go ahead and edit that template. In the template here, we've got a few different variables that we're going to be working with here. So the first one is the host name there, and we're going to run this through a loop here, and so this will come out with the host name, which was the different airport codes that we had listed, and then we have the description, and so the description here we're just going to put that again, that field that had the city spelled out, or in the case of Ho Chi Minh City, the acronym. And then we've got the IP address. And now if you remember, the IP address was specified as a network address, and it had CIDR notation there. Now, when Bronwyn types this out here, she's not just going to have it echo out the particular variable, but we're going to do what's called a filter. And so this is a Jinja2 concept that Ansible utilizes in templates. And so you can take data, and it's just like a Unix where you can pipe multiple commands. Say you might pipe the output of a command, and you pipe it to word count or to grep or set, and you continue to pipe things. It's a very similar concept. So whatever was previous standard in gets piped to standard out essentially here. And so this is a pretty tricky example here. So we're printing out that variable, that IP address. We're piping it to the IP address filter, and we're specifying 2. So that's got to show us the second IP address. And then we're piping it again to another filter that's going to echo back just the IP address. And so we're going to get that network address with the second usable IP address, and it's not going to have the CIDR notation if we've done this correctly. And the same thing for the net mask. If you remember on a Cisco sort of iOS config, you typically have the IP address, and in space you have the subnet mask. But it's not on that short CIDR notation here. So again, we're using another filter where we're going to echo out that IP address, but we're going to pipe it in and say, just give us the net mask output of that. The same thing can be done for IPv6 addresses too. So this is another great feature about Ansible, is that IPv6 is a first-class citizen when it comes to any of this variable manipulation. Very similar here. So we're going to echo out that variable. We're going to do the second usable IP address, and we're going to change the output to have a kind of the standard host/prefix output here. So we'll retain that subnet mask. And again, the syntax is slightly different. Again, on a v4, you have the network address, or you have the IP address and the subnet with a space in between. But with v6, it's typically concatenated together. And then for a gateway, we'll do something fairly similar. Just the difference here is that we'll use the first usable IP address. And again, multiple filters being utilized here. So the first is specifying, take that network address, show me the first usable IP address, and again, only echo back the IP address portion. And then similar for the gateway. And it would do the same thing for IPv6 here. So again, taking the variable, first usable address, and only echo back the IP address portion. Don't include the subnet portion. Oh well.
So we're going to go ahead and save this file. So tasks, similar to the Hello World example, now we're going to have to actually make sure we create a directory for the output files and then generate the config that we just templated out. So tasks, they just go in the procedural list, and you can also add a lot of conditions to that as well. So if you want, you can add a condition to it. So it says, oh hey, if this is an Ubuntu system, only run this task, or don't run this task. And it's very powerful, and there's a lot of things that you can do with that.
So go back to the command line here, and just to reiterate, we've had that reference data that we've just haven't really touched. We've just used as reference data. We've created the templates that we're going to be utilizing to output this data with. We've got the variables, and then now we're doing the tasks to say, okay, with that variable data, what are the steps we're going to perform? So again, structured as a YAML file, as you'll see kind of over and over again in Ansible land. And so the first here that we're going to be doing is naming this particular task. We'll be using the file module. So again, like we had in the first example, we're going to specify that we want to create a subdirectory called configs. And each time, Ansible is going to check that that subdirectory exists. So if it's the first time, we'll get that orange color because it's created it. And if it already exists, we'll get that green color. It's already been done. The file module, by the way, has probably 20 directives. So you can say create a file that's blank, set a file for particular permissions or owner. So it's extremely powerful. It's very basic syntax here. We're just saying create this directory, make sure it exists. You could also certainly say make sure this directory doesn't exist or remove this file. So again, very powerful. The next task here is going to be utilizing that Jinja 2 functionality. This is called the template module. So if you were to search in your favorite search engine template module Ansible, you would get all the directives here. So source is the input, the template itself. Destination is where do we want to output this particular information to. And then we're saying again here the configs directory and looping through a list.
And it's important to know real quick with the path and the file module that we're using, and then also with the destination, we're doing that dot and then the directory because this is relative to where you're going to run the Ansible playbook. We're going to do that from the kind of Ansible like root directory where we've been working with all of these.
Again, the with items will be following that sites, and that was the variables that we define in that YAML structure. So again, those are the 3 sites with the airport codes and the IP addresses and that sort of thing.
And it's important when you do with items and you're referencing a variable to wrap that variable in quotes. If you don't, then Ansible is likely to stop you in your tracks and be like, hey, we think you need to wrap this in quotes. This is a kind of new safeguard with Ansible 2.0 and uploads.
So we'll go back to the slides here after we've saved this file and talk about host. Again, in these examples, we're just going to be running the example against localhost. So we've got this variable data. We have these templates, or the single template that we've written. We've written a play that has the particular task that says create this output directory, template out these files, and do that action on localhost. Don't do it on a remote host. So again, just to review, I know we keep running the tree command here, but we want to make sure that the directory structure is very clear to people because it can be quite confusing in Ansible land. So we've got the reference data we haven't touched. We've now created the task, which again, with our steps we want to perform. We've got the Jinja 2 template, and then we have the variable data that we're sourcing in. So now we're just going to create a very simple inventory file, and we just happen to call the directory inventory. So in this syntax, the group is called local, and the host is called localhost, and in a very simple file format. This again is not YAML, but this looks more like an INI file. And then we've got the play that's going to bring it all together here. And so again, we're going to bring together the host, the roles, and the variables, and then execute this. I just go ahead and create. So this is again is a YAML file. Because of that, we've got the 3 dashes in the beginning. And this is basically stating on that role that we've created, which host are we going to run it on? Because the inventory could have multiple hosts, and we want to limit where that's happening. Now, in this case, we've only defined the local host, so it's quite simple here. So we've got the name, the host that we're going to run it against. Connection is local, so it's not going to attempt to do any SSH or anything like that. As mentioned, gather facts. We're not doing anything that really needs facts. Like we don't need to know the disk size or the MAC address of our local host, so there's no reason to run that module. And then we're going to specify the particular router role that we've created.
So we're going to go ahead and save this file. Okay, so now actually running a play. So as mentioned earlier in the Hello World example, we've got the command, which is Ansible playbook. The flag that we're setting there is that -I, and that's, hey, we want to add an inventory with us. We use an inventory. Inventory in this case is the directory that we've named inventory, and then the playbook, which we've decided to call playbook.yaml, but you could call it website.yaml, router.yaml, whatever makes sense. We'll go ahead and show the directory structure here. So this is everything.
And all the Ansible commands, such as Ansible playbook, they have a dash help, so all the syntax is available there.
So let's see if this works. Oh no, we had an error. Well, this is good because actually it's important to be able to troubleshoot and debug, because odds are you are going to have a problem. So unable to find config.j2 in expected path.
Okay, so we're going to look at that role where we define the different tasks. So if you remember the router's role, we had create the outputs directory, and then we had the template task.
Here's our problem. We said we want to use config.j2. We want config1.j2. So let's try running that again. Oh,
Okay.
There we go.
So again, look at the color output there. We've got the OK on the output directory because the first time that was created. And then again, the particular task that we have is templated out these configs.
And we'll just go ahead and run this again so you can see it's exactly like Hello World. It doesn't actually need to execute anything. So it comes back as everything passed, it's okay, but we haven't actually changed anything. Sorry, I gotta shrink this down a little bit.
Okay, so we've got some files that outputted into configs. And so again, the first step that we had in our play was to create that configs directory, and now we've got these config files.
Yay, you've got configs.
Okay.
And, I mean, it could be something like what happened to us just now. Like, maybe it doesn't work that first time, and that's where you need to do some debugging. Because, yeah, most of the time when I run Ansible, it usually breaks, and I have to spend some time figuring out why. Like, where did I go wrong? Did I typo something? Did I, like, not know how to actually, like, do this? So here, we're actually going to cat out figs so you can see what they look like.
Okay, so again, we see some of the power of the filter there. We've got the IP address is the .2 address. We've got the subnet there. We see that the .1 is the default gateway. We've got the host name specified there. So again, not just searching and replacing the variables, but actually doing some IP calculations on it. We'll look at a different one here for San Francisco. Again, we've got the description being different, the IP address calculation again occurred, and same thing for V6.
So yeah, you got to see firsthand what a little bit of Ansible debugging looks like. It could be a lot of different things. Formatting weirdness and typos end up being my two major problems when I'm trying to debug Ansible issues. So here's some common Ansible debugging issues that you might run into, especially when you're dealing with different like variable formats, like a list or it's a dictionary or some other combination. Could be a syntax error while loading the YAML script. Maybe something isn't defined somewhere. So that's how you generate configs. We didn't get to like go into as much detail as we wanted to, but you can see that like it's pretty powerful. It doesn't take a lot of time to really do this. You may have a really complex config yourself that you need to do, but you can start small with a small part of it, and try to just generate that one part, and then maybe do a diff against your existing config, so you can make sure you can see like, oh yeah, this is totally the same, or oh wow, I like got this like wildly wrong. Maybe the format's off. Maybe the IP calculator didn't work exactly as you were hoping. And you can just play around with it. And since you're doing everything locally, you're not touching any devices or anything. It's very safe to do this. And then there's also lots of resources, which is pretty cool. So a lot of these are more systems focused. In the last year in particular, there's been a lot more kind of like networking stuff going on. Ansible, for example, the organization, has started having more of a networking focus since they were purchased by Red Hat. And so there's a lot of resources out there, and there's a lot of stuff interchangeable too. I found that Stack Overflow and Stack Exchange actually answer a lot of my questions. The Ansible docs are pretty good for when you're going to use modules in a standard way, but sometimes they can be a little difficult to navigate. So yeah, sometimes Google's just your best friend for that.
So yeah, just after the break here, we'll get quite a bit more exciting here. So we'll show some examples of where we're doing DNS zone file generation. We're automating our IBGP setup. We're referencing other host variables. So things get a lot more powerful. I used Ansible day to day, and it's completely revolutionized how I bring up new routers or switches. It's literally just adding in some variables and then running the Ansible play. And I have a complete router configured, all of its peering sessions, MD5 keys, SSH keys, host name, messages of the day, IGP, it's done. So it's quite powerful, and so we'll be talking more about those examples in the 102 here after the break.